All right.
Hi, Jiaying. Thank you to grant me this call to discuss the coexistence between CBDCs and private stablecoins. So I will maybe just introduce you for starters. So Dr. Jiaying Jiang from the University of Florida, specialized in blockchain regulation. So I'm really happy to have you on this podcast because it's a nice complement to the discussion we had in Paris on the topic of coexistence between CBDCs and private stablecoins, with many different experts from the EIS, Daniel Aidan from Accenture, Ousmane Mandang, etc., etc. We had more specifically a last discussion on the regulation of this coexistence, which rather focused on the European context. So with Xavier Lavessière from the IMF, Simon Pollereau from the European Crypto Association, and Anastasia Kotovskaya from CP in Berlin. So during this conversation, we emphasized the fact that the European regulation, characterized by the MiCA regulation mostly, was not very much in favor of private digital currencies. We could say, for instance, because it excludes certain business cases like algorithmic stablecoins, but also because it creates a big burden, regulatory burden, weighing on issuers of private stablecoins, asset-backed stablecoins especially. So in the end, not such a great environment for private stablecoins to thrive, but on the contrary, a good environment for CBDCs to thrive, because everything's done for the digital euro to become a major means of payment in Europe in the next years. So given this context, since you are the experts from the US, and of course also with a great experience about the Chinese case, I would be very much pleased if you could tell us more about how this coexistence can unfold in the US, given the current regulatory context. So maybe for starters, you can describe how things go right now in the US, and the same for China. So please start as you want, either the US or China.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think two topics here. The first one is the policy, legal, and regulatory treatments of CBDC here in the United States and in China. And then the next topic, the next question would be the policy, legal, regulatory treatment of stablecoins here in the United States and in China. So first, I will give you a quick summary of what's going on here right now in the United States with regarding to CBDC developments. Well, I think everything happened this year. If you ask me last year, I would say, sorry, no policy update. And this year, well, starting from, I would say probably in January this year, the Federal Reserve first published a report and on the CBDC's benefit and risk. This signaled to the market that, well, finally, our central bank here in the United States start to, look into this space. And immediately after that, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and MIT start to experiment with the technology at a project called Project Hamilton. And they have already published two reports. The first report earlier this year, I guess in the summer, and share their result. And 2 weeks ago, and they announced that they have already completed the project and shared the most updated data. So I don't want to go into the weed. For our readers, if you're interested in that, you can go and check that report. And immediately after that, this is a big thing. The Biden administration published an executive order and saying that we need to study and research, we need to have more understanding of a potential US CBDC. And one goal for that is we want to make sure, when I say we, I mean the US government want to make sure that the US is in the leading position in terms of CBDC development, in terms of like standard setting. Of course, they don't want to be lagging behind. And one of the most recent report is, the White House asked the Office of science and technology policy to study the technical possibilities of US CBDC. And in September, this office just published a report and studied different kind of technical possibilities. Again, I provide all this provide this update, and if our readers are interested, feel free to go each of these report, and they're all very rich in terms of a CBDC update. So this we are here in the United States right now, still in the research and development experimentation process. In China, well, China, as you know, China is at a very advanced stage. The early stage of research started in 2014. And 2021, the PBOC, which is People's Bank of China, published a report and share the most recent update about e-CNY, which is China's central bank. And in the report, you can find data on, for example, how many wallets have been created, including individuals' wallet and corporate wallet. And China has run pilot programs in about 20 cities right now. And if we have time, I have to share that my mom also participated in the trial. And I think the number I have this year, China also ran the pilot program in the Winter Olympic. And in total, 261 million wallets have been created with a total transaction value over 13.75 billion US dollar. So that's the most recent update. But in terms of the legal and regulatory treatment, well, in China, two most relevant laws are one, central bank law, which governs whether central bank can or cannot do something. And the next law is monetary law, whether, for example, a new currency can be a monetary unit. In terms of the first question, whether the central bank can or cannot do something, well, this is very relevant, whether a central bank can issue a digital currency. If the existing law is not clear, because the existing laws just say we can issue the paper money and coins. And the interesting thing is there is an amendment to the existing central bank law, which changed, or just an amendment saying that the central bank can issue digital form of money. And earlier next year, the Congress is going to pass the law, which this will give the authority, the PBOC, the authority to issue a digital version of money, which is e-CNY. So it's not a big problem here. You just change the law, and it's quite simple. And in terms of whether the e-CNY is a new monetary unit, well, I think the head of PBOC have already said that this is not a new monetary unit. It's an existing monetary unit, so it doesn't involve any change to the monetary law. So that's the CBDC update in China and in the United States. Next, we talk about stablecoin update in the United States and in China. Well, first in the United States, there are regulations at a federal level and at a state level. Here, CBDC issuers are money transmitters according to Bank Secrecy Act. So they need to do three things. I talk to my students all the time. You need to do three things as a money transmitter. First, establish a KYC program, know your customer program. And second, you need to establish a anti-money laundering program. And third, as a money transmitter, you need to report any suspicious activities. For companies, run business here in the United States, for example, Circle USDC, they have license, they register with the FinCEN. So they need to do these three things. And at a state level, similar laws like money transmitter laws just comply with those laws. And in China, I think you are very familiar with this. Stablecoins is a type of cryptocurrency, or maybe more stable cryptocurrencies. It's banned in China, and China has issued a few bans on cryptocurrencies. So that's the only legal update I have right now. It's not legal in China, so we don't see any Chinese any Chinese stablecoins. So that's the summary.
Well, yeah, thank you for this very brief but on-point summary of the situation in the US and China. What strikes me is that it really feels like you have the EU, China, and the US having like the three options on the spectrum. You know, in one case, at the the left end of the spectrum, you have China with a ban on stablecoins and full CBDC. In the middle, you have sort of the EU, where private coins are not banished, but they are not encouraged, and you have a large space left for the digital euro. And then you have the US context, where, of course, you only have large stable coins like USDC, USDT, etc. And you start to think about the CBDC, but it's not there, and it will take probably many, many years. So three very different situations, which is why now I would like to talk a bit about the future. So what do you think is going to come for stablecoins and CBDCs in the US? And one particular question, do you think the US could invent a new regulation for public blockchains, you know, to have, for instance, big actors like Circle or like Tether that are compliant with the regulation and still using a blockchain whose validation depends on a decentralized system? Because in Europe, this is sort of impossible with the MiCA regulation.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time to talk about the future right now. Before we talk about future, well, first we need to understand the big picture here, the overall policy attitude here in the United States. While the policymakers, they do not want to stifle innovation for sure. And of course, regulators want to balance the need for innovation as well as the need, for example, to combat any criminal activities like money launderings. Well, the big attitude here, the overall attitude here is the regulators still want the private sector to innovate, to provide more financial products and services. So in the future, in the next 5 years, I think, well, at this moment, actually, we already have stablecoin bills at the Senate. And the question is whether they're going to pass, whether House and Senate are going to pass the bill. And highly unlikely this year, probably no, because, you know, approaching the end of this administration, the Congress, and next year with new Congress, whether they're gonna pass this law, we don't know. But stablecoin regulation is the low-hanging fruit right now, because we are very clear about the business model, the potential risk it's gonna pose to the consumers. For example, in the bill, one of the highlights is to make sure that stablecoin are backed by cash or very liquid asset. And these are very low-hanging fruit. Or if you want to do business here in the United States, just comply with these rules, and it's quite easy. And to answer your question, whether we're going to see more policy and regulations, I would say yes. Probably in next year, in a year or two, we're going to see this very clear regulation on stablecoins. But there's a question here, how to regulate stablecoins. That's still very controversial. And if you listen to the, I forgot it's House hearing or a Senate hearing earlier this year, they are debating whether we should regulate stablecoin issuers as a federal depository insurance corporation, because if you are FDIC, then you can have access to insurance and deposit, which will be safer, but it's a very lengthy process and it's very costly for stablecoin issuers to get a license. So that's a little bit controversial. But again, we can start with the uncontroversial part, which is, for example, ask those stablecoin issuers to have enough asset to prove their reserve, etc.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So there are going to be a regulation in the US on stablecoins, which should favor, if I understand well, the actors that are already in the market. Then it just depends on the legal category to which they will belong for certain regulatory requirements somehow. So either money market fund like, or bank like, or something different. Okay, so we will end up having, I guess, two very different pieces of regulation between the US and the EU, right? So do you think in this context that the EU can have, can win something to this game? Because as you already have most of the innovation occurring in the US regarding stablecoins, do you think the EU with the MiCA regulation can attract new actors, build new actors, or is it sort of impossible and we will just end up having in the EU a pure CBDC environment?
Well, first of all, in terms of whether EU or US can win, that's a very tough question, especially when the US has not clear regulation on stablecoin at this moment. And I know EU, there's a MiCA, and I briefly look at the MiCA or MiCA, whatever you call it. Well, I think it's not very friendly for stablecoin companies, actually. There's a limit on how much transaction they can process every day. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an EU expert. And then there are also other requirements on stablecoins companies. And here in the United States, I mean, at least at this moment, it's more an open space that regulators and regulated groups, which is stablecoin companies, are exploring potential regulations that can benefit the sector, and in the meantime can meet policy goals, which is, for example, to protect consumers, to combat money laundering and other financial crimes, etc. So it's really hard to say, well, whether China, US or EU will win. It really depends on when the US will roll out these stablecoin regulations. And well, in terms of China, the answer will be different. If you ask me to compare China and EU, I would say EU probably have a better opportunity because there's clear rules that stablecoin companies can follow. And in China, it's a clear ban. And I don't see, in the near future, China gonna unban the cryptocurrency. So I would say in terms of geopolitical competition, EU would have a better chance than China.
With private solutions or with the
private solutions like private stablecoins or other DeFi products. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's wait and see then.
Yeah, let's wait and see.
Yeah, exciting moment to discuss about that. Okay, so next question. Just to talk a bit further about the future. I don't know if we really focused on this point, but if I ask you bluntly to tell me whether we will have a CBDC in the US in 5 years, what is the probability to have it? Is it a clear yes, a clear no, a clear maybe, 50-50?
I would tend to again, I'm not very good at predictions. If I win, I win. If you would have to get me drinks the next time I'm in Paris. Yeah.
All right, with pleasure.
I tend to say 50-50 or lower than 50-50.
Yeah.
Because I still believe, developing countries or countries with weaker financial systems would benefit from CBDCs much more than advanced economies could. For example, US certainly is an advanced economy. Here, people have access to different kind of financial services or products. Take payment as an example. Well, yes, is US CBDC or a potential US dollar, digital dollar can provide another form of payment, but people here have already used, credit card, debit card, and other cashless payment apps like Venmo, Zelle, or Apple Pay, Google Pay. So there are multiple choices. And in terms of whether a US dollar will provide more benefits, well, for sure, yes, there's another forms of payment, but whether the benefit will outweigh the cost, then there's a question policymakers need to study and then decide whether they want to issue a US CBDC. So that's why I would say probably less than 50%. But of course, in other countries with weaker financial systems, where they have very limited access to financial services or products, then a CBDC, which can help them to, send payments safely or in a quick fashion, very quickly, I guess it can send payment instantaneously. So for those group of people, I would say there's a huge benefit, and the benefit could possibly outweigh the cost. As we can see in the Bahamas, we talked to the people who created the sandbox. I think in Bahamas, that's a pretty good use case there. And people do enjoy the benefit of a CBDC, and the cost, I guess, is manageable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the expression you use, and that I do not hear very often when talking about CBDCs. In fact, the idea that benefits should outweigh the costs.
Yeah.
Because we always focus on benefits, on what it can bring, but we do not really focus on the costs, or the alternatives to CBDC. So what would have happened if we had no CBDC? So this is opportunity cost here.
Yeah.
So,
if I may, just a quick follow-up to that. Well, not only on like crypto regulation, whatever new regulations regulators or policymakers want to roll out, they need to do a regulatory impact assessment. By the way, this is also my doctorate study. Without a regulatory impact assessment, and then you just issue a new regulation, a new piece of policy, that will be very problematic. As a part of this regulatory impact assessment, a very useful tool is cost-benefit analysis. Of course, I think most policymakers, regulators, they do cost-benefit analysis before roll out or propose a new regulations or laws or policy.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. In France, we have, in theory, this obligation to deliver a cost-benefit analysis before adopting the law.
Yes, right.
It creates a lot of difficulties, but it exists in theory at least. So yeah, very valid point here. I think we are coming to an end with this conversation, which is why I would like to ask you a last question, broad question. Are you optimistic about the fact that regulation will help crypto, including private stablecoins and maybe also CBDCs, to thrive in the future? Or do you think innovation in this space can only occur outside regulation?
Well, in terms of whether I would be optimistic, I would say yes. And I do believe regulation is necessary. And if you think about the most recent, for example, FTX case, what happened here is it has nothing to do with cryptocurrency. It has nothing to do with blockchain technology. The reason it failed is, because of the complete failure of corporate governance, because, poor management, because, the CEO transfer money, customers' money without consent, without any disclosure. So these are traditional old-fashioned fraud. And we certainly need, let's say, if they comply with the laws or with the regulation, for example, 10b-5 anti-fraud regulation, then this may not happen if they just follow the existing laws and regulations. So I would say, yes, regulation is necessary for industry participants to follow in order to do the right thing. And in terms of like crypto regulations, I think the question to ask is, what kind of like crypto regulations we need in order for the sector to thrive. Well, that involved a lot of studies, a lot of research. One of the approach we talk about is the cost-benefit analysis, and then of course there are all other policy goals. For example, whether we want to issue a CBDC. Just like many other countries, we want to know whether it can reduce, let's say, costs, improve efficiency, whether it can enable financial inclusions. We need a lot of studies to reach a conclusion. If it's yes, then we study the cost. If the benefit outweigh the cost, yeah, then probably yes, we need to issue a US CBDC or a Chinese CBDC. Again, this involve a lot of research. But to answer your question, I'm still very optimistic about the regulation and the stablecoin or the CBDC.
All right. Okay. Very clear. So a lot of work for you eventually.
Yeah, a lot of work for sure.
Yeah, very, very nice. Then thank you very much, Jiaying, for this very fascinating conversation. And let's talk about it soon.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.